Hello, everyone. Let me go ahead and give everyone a couple more seconds to finish logging in. All right, well, hello, everyone. This is D. London, and welcome to the Trimble Business Center Power Hour, where we talk about all things TBC and TBC related. During today's Power Hour, we'll be discussing the utilization of the Create Vertical Design tool in TBC. But we do have all attendees in listen-only mode, but we welcome all questions and comments, so feel free to type them into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and our reps will respond. With us, we have Nick Pfeiferick, the CEC Software Regional Sales Specialist, and Alan Sharp, the Marketing Director and Partner of Rockpile Solutions, who will be discussing the Trimble Business Center Create Vertical Design tool, along with our special guest, Pat LaRue, and from Severino Trucking Company. Utilizing his experience and knowledge of TBC and using the Create Vertical Design tool for road construction and site development, Pat will share what he has learned along the way and together with Alan Sharp, dive into the tool and how it should be best utilized to increase productivity in modeling, adjusting your models in line with design changes, creating composite models by integrating model components, and other TBC tips and tricks. But it's always great to have Alan join us to share his TBC knowledge, and I'd like to also extend a warm welcome to Pat for joining us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to our experts. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, thank you, DeLondon. That's great. So yeah, welcome everybody to the Power Hour here. Nick asked me if I would take a look at organizing this one for him and try to get a power user on board here and to get him to show what he does with the product. So I know Pat pretty well. I got to know Pat through the Trimble Community Forum over the last couple of years. He's one of the most vocal people on there and obviously has tons of ideas. Anybody who goes on there will see that. And got to know him pretty well over the last couple of years. And we started, I guess, Pat, we started a few months back, or maybe 6-9 months back on vertical design together. I was trying to teach you how to use it, and you've come on leaps and bounds since then. But before we kind of get going, maybe just, Pat, could you give us a quick overview of who you are, where you're based, and the kind of work you do?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Pat LaRue. I work for Severino Trucking. We're a medium-sized contractor out of New Hampshire. We deal with, or we perform quite a bit of work from highway construction to subdivisions, commercial pad sites, small site rehabs, and do a little bit of everything. I wear a lot of hats in the company, but one of my biggest kind of concentrations is the machine control, supporting the machine control, creating models for the machine control. I do some estimating, data prep, project management, and I feel like that's just helped me kind of create a robust connection on how everything kind of ties together. And that's why I constantly, and like Alan said, kind of vocal on the community, just because seeing how different avenues kind of connect and integrate, which I think is great. And like the picture up shows, some days you're in the seat of a grader, so it's pretty fun. And a couple of other things about me: getting married at the end of the year or in a month, so I am super crazy right now, super busy. And then this is my puppy, who is just adorable, and she is what I come home to in my relaxation. So
awesome.
A couple of fun facts.
Okay, all right, so now we know all about you. Let's kind of dive in, I guess, to Trimble Business Center. But before we start, you know, you use Trimble Business Center as one of the tools you use. So can you give us a kind of a quick overview of the kind of toolkit that you have at your disposal personally at your company, and what, you know, where TBC fits into that work process for you?
Yes. So for tools that we use TBC, we use GCS 900. We previously used SCS 900, which has been upgraded to SiteWorks. We have about 10 machines on Trimble Earthworks. We have a couple of Trimble Sightvision products. I personally bought a Microsoft HoloLens and have Trimble Connect on there for 3D visualizing projects, and then just kind of try to, I guess, milk everything out of the Trimble fleet, on top of having various other programs like AgTech, that we use for our takeoffs. We have a couple Carlson licenses for surveying, and then also we have Civil 3D for data prep, just for compatibility issues that we run into from obtaining files from engineers and getting that into a usable format in TBC.
Okay, that's pretty common. We see that kind of mix in a lot of contractors. So it doesn't make you atypical from what we see out there, although you do have all the tools at your disposal by the sounds of it. Okay, so could you, before we kind of get down into the weeds of Create Vertical Design, could you boil down the data prep process, how you see it, into the sort of major steps, and kind of give us a kind of a high level of the things that you do to prepare yourself to start using the vertical design tool?
Definitely. I figured I would just take a kind of a typical subdivision drawing that we would receive from an engineer and kind of go through the processes and kind of highlight some of that. So I did very minor kind of data prep for bringing this in, but one of the most important things that I find when bringing in a drawing is I like to use the suffix for the layers, and part of that is just to kind of keep things organized, keeps that data, whether it's a revision or a small change, kind of grouped together. So I always put engineer in front of those layers, and then usually I'll put the import date or the revision date. That just helps to kind of keep your sanity. And then I like to do everything in layer groups. Makes it very easy to kind of turn everything off, and then I can see, okay, this is stuff that I've already prepped. So by utilizing the layer groups, that's very valuable. So we'll just go through, and my biggest tool I use when I first bring in is the standardize. And I'm just going to turn this off. So I'm just going to grab some line work. And a shout out to our developers out there. It'd be very awesome if you could filter with the standardize tool, because going through the list once you get that prepped can be a little tedious.
You mean by reducing the number of layers that you're working with when you're doing this process, rather than having the full list all the time, just by being able to put a filter at the top there?
Yeah, or even just being able to type in so it would filter out this list would be very awesome.
Yeah, we see that quite a bit when people get a lot of layers in a drawing. It's something we need to work on, giving them more management tools for that, I think.
I'm not going to
Okay, so in this process, you're basically taking the CAD layers from the engineer and you're putting them onto the layers and grouping the data as you want it for your work process. Is that kind of what you're doing here?
Exactly, because I've already spent the time in creating my layer groups kind of based upon how I send it out to the field, how I'm going to use the data. So by using the standardize tool, it's a very quick process to kind of get everything sorted out. So when I toggle my view filter and I go to like my design, that's all my data that I'm actually going to use to kind of compile this model. So that makes it very useful. Just going to grab a couple more things real quick. So right now I'm grabbing my sidewalk.
So the key here is to have a great template to start off with that has all the layers that you want on it, and then you're going to bring the data in and map it all to those layers before you start. Ideally, you don't have to create any new layers in this process because your template is so well set up, right?
Right. Yeah, and there's always sporadic stuff that you got to build because every project is a little bit different, but it does help to kind of keep everything consistent, especially when it's going out to the field. That's the biggest, one of the biggest things. And then also makes it nice because now, whether it's for the machine control or for the data collectors, they get used to how you prep the data, and it's not like anyone's game every time you send out some information. So
yeah, you want all your jobs to be the same, right? So you do it in a standard way. That way everybody knows where they are, no matter which engineer did the work. Okay.
Yep. All right, so I'm just bringing my profile real quick, which I already prep data. All right, perfect. So so what we're looking at right now is we have our our profiles, our alignments that already previously constructed in 3D. We have our contours, and then we have our 2D line work. Now, the reason I was such a big fan of the vertical design is because traditionally with my models, I would actually have almost 2 sets of line work. I would have a 3D set of line work and then the actual 2D that I would send out to the field. The 3D was more just for my purposes and would actually kind of compose the model. And that worked, but whenever you had a revision, it was a huge pain because if they changed the configuration of the edge of pavement, now you're not just updating 1 set of line work, you're updating 2. And then it's also not as useful because when you take it to a program like Sightvision that can actually utilize that 3D information, if you don't have your line work, like your edge of pavement elevated, it doesn't do you any good. So when I kind of heard about the vertical design, it very much intrigued me because now it's taking your line work, updating it, and providing it in a 3D space, which is really what we're doing anyway. So I was a huge fan of that. One of the things I'm going to do real quick is use a nice little TML from Rock Pile Solutions, a crop crossing, which is a great tool when you're kind of cleaning up contours between edges of pavement. I don't think I like the direction, but so we can just do this. So you have 2 options with that. You can either click 2 lines that is kind of encompassing the line work you want to crop, or you can actually set offsets. So this is nice because it quickly allows you to clean up the contours on the edge of pavement. A lot of times the engineers will give you this, but because of the profile, they may not kind of take into consideration the vertical curve, or when they actually kind of smooth out the contours, it's not really a good representation of what the roadway is doing. I always trim those out.
Yeah, a lot of people do the trimming back of the contours around the curb and gutter and flow section, especially around islands in parking lots and stuff like that, because you're going to blow through the islands probably anyway. So exactly. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Yep.
So now that we have that, I'm going to go into the vertical design. Now, when I'm doing this, I like to use a numeric to kind of keep organization, because vertical design is very particular on how you set up your instructions. You need to be very methodical because it runs it in a sequence. So when I do it, I usually do my roadway. So I'll call this 1, grab my roadway, grab my alignment, and then I'm going to grab my next set of lines that I'm going to kind of elevate based off of that.
So just to summarize before you dive in too much, Pat, onto this, I just want to kind of just make sure everybody level set here. So the Create Vertical Design tool is like a parametric tool for elevating lines. So we start off with a main line, like the 3D alignment for the center line of the road, and then we can input parametric instructions to elevate lines. As opposed to using spot levels only, we can use a mix of spot levels and slopes and differences in elevation to calculate the elevations of the lines. And those lines get added into a model continuously, which is dynamically linked to the instruction. So if you change the instruction, the sequence of elevations will change and the model will update to reflect those changes, right? So what, in terms of, before you dive into showing this, in comparison between doing, like, say, what I would call traditional data prep, where you just take the contours and the elevations and the spots that you're given, then you do some interpretation to fill in the gaps that are missing on the plans, compared to, say, vertical design, where you're using interpreted slopes and differences in height, and you're using parametric methods. What's the main reason that's a benefit to you as a user?
For me, the main reason is it does sometimes take a little more data prep, because you have to be a little bit more methodical on how you are setting up your line work, or how you're kind of prepping your data. But the benefit to me is no project is ever set in stone. There's always revisions, there's always updates, whether it be for the profile because you're trying to minimize your cut and fill. The engineer comes up with something. By utilizing the vertical design, things get dynamically linked, and it makes it a lot easier to change things, because now your curb is changing as you change your edge of pavement. And it just provides a faster way of modeling. Curb, typically, unless you're at a sidewalk or a tip down, is always going to be, in our area, 1/2 foot higher than our edge of pavement. So I can go through and I can just create a vertical design instruction that links my curb to my edge of pavement. And even though I may not be done with my edge of pavement, I know that my curb is going to be elevated correctly once I'm done kind of modifying that edge of pavement. So it really allows you to kind of manipulate things and have that peace of mind that those dependent objects are going to update accordingly.
Okay, let's show us what you do.
All right. So right now, and this is something that you could do with the corridor instruction. I much preferred using the vertical design though, because again, now you get your 3D line work. Now this is probably a bug because the vertical design doesn't always like alignments, which is something to kind of keep in mind and not to get deterred from, but you can use the convert the line string to convert an alignment to a line string, and it works just the same.
Yeah, the challenge with this is that if the alignment, horizontal and vertical, aren't exactly the same length, it can throw an error in here. So using a line string and then cropping them so that they're the same length makes this work better, typically.
So now by doing that, so again, I'm just going to go from here, and I'm going to assume our cross section is 2% all the way for this example.
Okay, now, so those are working now, right? Yep.
Yep. Now with the engineer's example, they actually had this as a gutter line. So this is where that kind of extra little data prep comes in to play. But you can quickly break this. I'm going to offset my alignment. Here we go, 12 feet. And from here to here. Part of that. There we go.
So one of the key things that I feel like is important, Pat, and maybe you can comment on this, is strategically when you start planning out a model, you've got to work out kind of how you want to build it. You've got to work out what's going to be elevated off what's going to be elevated in what sequence, what line work you kind of need to achieve that strategy. So in this case, you're building additional lines that weren't in the CAD drawing to put the pavement through at a fixed cross slope before you get to those push outs for the whatever those are, parking areas or turning areas or whatever. So you have to kind of plan out the line work ahead of time before you really start diving into the vertical design. You can do it on the fly and keep adding it if you need to, but it's easier if you actually can think through that before you start, right?
Correct. The best way of kind of thinking about it is those are your lanes, no different than you would have your lane on your corridor that you're using for your instructions. Makes it a lot easier if you have those lines kind of continuous and connected. And that's kind of a hard, I still kind of battle that because from a, I guess, material standpoint, if I was doing a takeoff, then you would almost think that by having this line come through, you have two areas. You have your roadway and you have your pull off, which isn't, I guess, incorrect by any means, but it's just a kind of a weird concept. You would want to kind of keep that all as one area. So now we kind of have this area and then we have our roadway.
Right. And the same with intersections, right? You really have to push the pavement of the main road through the intersection rather than leaving a gap so that you can actually get the cross slopes in the main road through the intersections correct, right?
Yep. So then as you're creating your vertical designs, they actually populate in the Project Explorer. So you can see them here, and then you can go and edit. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back and I'm going to go to my lines tab and add those two little sections that we broke off. So now that those have been added, I'm going to go through and add my instructions. The other nice thing I really like about this is you can actually see your instructions in plan view. Some of this stuff you could actually do with the corridor tool, but you're starting to kind of bring everything all encompassing into the plan view, which is very nice. Because if you have different areas that vary, you can kind of see that, or if the engineer has given you different cross slopes that vary, now you can bring in a PDF and kind of overlay your instructions on where their callouts are and update that accordingly.
So could you show us the surface and the contours as well there at that point? Like as you're building a surface, you're building line work here that is actually building a surface in the background, right? Or are you not building a surface here?
Correct. It is. Sometimes I'll turn off the surface because I find it's a little faster, and because I build things segmented, it's not always kind of true to what the final surface is going to look like. But the advantage of this is you can go into your surface settings and have it create the surface if you were to kind of combine everything. And you can also have it show your contours. The one downside is they do kind of dump it on the zero layer. So if you got a lot of stuff on the zero layer, that can be a little bit cumbersome, but it does give you a nice visual of what you're creating on the fly.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. So once you get good at this kind of thing, then you typically change the way you work. Whereas you may show the surface early on when you're learning the system. Once you know and you're confident with it and you know the instructions are working, then you basically wouldn't necessarily show the surface just for speed and for keeping the clutter down on the graphics, I guess, right?
Right. So the next one I'm going to do is curb. I'm just going to basically take the same edge of pavement that I elevated, and now I'm going to start to grab my curb lines. And then the advantage of this is because this puts it in the container. I don't know about other customers, but a lot of times we get our operators that will kind of complain that your machines, when they kind of pass over where the curb is, the blade kicks up. There are different ways of working around that. But by isolating your edge of pavement, you can start to kind of create more specific models. And again, because everything's dynamically linked, you can create a model and know that if you make a change to your profile, it's going to update your edge of pavement, update your curb accordingly. So you can actually start to kind of get more specific models. I'm hoping that eventually there's a couple of tools implemented that will help us make subgrade models a little easier. So now same thing, I am going to use the cross DZ and I'm going to put in 0.5. Let me grab this and dock this. That way you can see it kind of build as I'm building it. So I'm just going to go from my edge of pavement to my curb, and that elevated that. I'm going to do my other side. You can go in here and you can put descriptions. So I can put right for the right side of the road, left. A lot of times I will put in descriptions to kind of give myself reminders of specific areas, whether it's a station of an alignment. Right here, you can see kind of how this blew up because it's not correct. So we just go back in here and we break this section. Because what that's doing is it's actually doing 0.5 off of that travel way, not necessarily that
because the lines were separated to do the main pavement. They're not one continuous line, therefore it can't do that bit through there in the same way, right?
Correct. And then the instructions that I typically try to stick with are the cross slope and the cross DZ as much as possible. And the advantage of that versus the free DZ and the free cross slope is if you have a vertical curve on an alignment or a gutter line, what it's going to actually do is take that and apply that to your edge of pavement, to your curb. So now, another thing that I've gotten complaints from our grader operators is when you have a low point or a high point, the engineers don't create a vertical curve for that, nor do we kind of model that most of the time. So by being able to take that and have it apply to the rest of your model, you're actually smoothing that out and you get a way better ride. It's not a sharp point.
Right. So this allows you, I mean, you are an engineer, right? You have your PE now, Pat?
Yes. Yep.
So does that give you any ability to do more as a contractor for the client because you are a PE, or do you think this is something that anybody that's in construction data modeling can do the same kind of thing as you're doing, even though they're maybe not a PE?
I think they could without being a PE. We use it more for submittals. A lot of the stuff that I'm doing is not necessarily design. It's more constructability is what I look for. Trying to make it easier on the machines to build it. What's practical. If you have them trying to say that you're going to put in a 5 foot wide pavement and they have it's more for the constructability that I think using the vertical design and some of these tools in TBC is what gives us an advantage and better feedback to the engineers, because they're good at what they do, but having the field experience is something they definitely lack. So we try to bridge that gap as much as possible.
Do you ever find that you do like what if planning with an engineer so you can show them different alternatives based on your ideas and then they can implement what you want?
Yes, and then there's also some talks of design build up in our area. So I'm very much trying to be ahead of the game for when that's implemented by kind of capitalizing on some of these tools that are available to us to make things easier. Again, using the vertical design, if we wanted to go in here now that we have a couple strings kind of created, I could go into my 3 ponds. And actually, I don't even need to do that because it's based off of my line string. But if we decided that this elevation right here should now be whatever 160, I can raise that, and now I can quickly rebuild both of my vertical designs, and they just updated accordingly. So that's part of the value.
Yeah, it's interesting that you build your models in separate vertical designs, but you daisy chain them off each other so that basically once the first one is updated, the second one automatically updates from the first one, rather than putting all those instructions into one big vertical design. You keep it simple by keeping them into little groups, if you like, and then basically allow the groups to daisy chain one to the next. And that's why you're using that numerical value at the start of each vertical design name to keep them in order. So it's processing them sequentially. That's a good idea. Great.
Yeah, and part of the reason too is because now it's creating these containers. So I could go in here and I could click on that vertical design, right click and say select child lines. And you could either have the vertical design make that design for you or the surface for you, or I could create one and again make a subgrade model for the machines just based off of the edge of pavement. If I wanted to kind of have this go 2 feet beyond, I could now create another vertical design that I could call finish grade or subgrade. That would just be my edge of pavement 2 feet off with that same cross slope. And then my machines don't have to worry about kicking up when they cross a curb. Again, keeping in mind there's ways around that. But,
so do you find in your modeling sort of daily work, obviously you're kind of a master of most of the tools that we have, like side slope and corridors and vertical design, and then just standard data prep and CAD kind of tools. Do you find that you build your models with a combination of those different tools to get to the end result? Obviously, vertical design doesn't have tie slopes, so you have to find a way of tying to the ground. So what kind of combinations do you typically find yourself using?
Yes. So vertical design is great. I'd like to see it expand more. I'd almost like to see kind of a hybrid between vertical design and side slope, because I think the two in some cases are very close to being the same, but obviously there is some differences. Um, but I feel like vertical design is something I use for everything. Even if I'm doing a parking lot, I will use vertical design. I'll go through and maybe manually kind of elevate my edge of pavement, but then I will use the vertical design to update the curb. And now I know my curb is going to be consistently half a foot off unless it's in a tip down area. And then I will use the create side slope for my ditch lines, kind of similar to down in here.
Sure.
So
could you,
yes.
could you show us then, you talk about tip downs and ramps and things like that. Could you show us any of those elements using this?
Yep. So so now we got our curb elevated. I'm going to create another vertical design. And this is where I found that kind of creating the separate vertical designs is very useful for things such as sidewalks, because they can vary. Sometimes they get added on throughout the project. The more you put in a vertical design, the more kind of fussy it can get. So you're better off kind of daisy chaining them. All right. So I'm going to grab my back of sidewalk and apply. Pull this right here. All right, so very quickly, I'm going to use a 1.5%, which is ADA for cross slope of sidewalks. So within a matter of seconds, I just kind of created my sidewalk based off of my curb and know that that's going to be a consistent 1.5%. And this is something that we are very particular on, because we've been burned in that in the past, is making sure that those cross slopes are always between 1 and 2%, which sometimes when you get a file, they are not, for sometimes valid reasons, sometimes from just oversight or flat out mistakes. So now I know that our model reflects that, and we should be able to put that in. What I am going to do is now add a 0.5 times 0.01, add an instruction right here. And that's not in the correct vertical design, but you can flaw it pretty easily. So what I had to do is I actually had to change the vertical design that I was doing it in. Usually I'll do a vertical design that encompasses the curb and the sidewalk, because those two go pretty hand in hand. But I just took my 0.5 offset, multiplied that by 0.015 for my tip down. And by doing so, because I have my 0.5% cross slope, it updated my curb as well. And I need to So you can see down at the bottom, every time you make an adjustment, it's updating the surfaces. That's why I usually turn it off, because when you're making these small adjustments, it does speed it up. Okay, and 0.5. So now I'll just have to rebuild my sidewalks, but it quickly just made a ramp for me. And the nice thing about this is, again, if we need to edit, massage that edge of pavement, I know the curb and the sidewalk are going to keep that cross section, which is so critical. So that's honestly, even just for doing curb and sidewalks, that the vertical design has such a huge value in that, making sure that things are meeting the criteria they need. and kind of modeling with confidence that they're going to update accordingly is one of the biggest reasons for using it.
And you can also stop the rebuilds on those, Pat. So when you actually look at the properties of the vertical design, you can actually change the rebuild so it's not automatic, and therefore you can build 50 instructions and then just tell it to rebuild when you're ready. So if you're doing a lot of changes on a big vertical design, you can simplify it and eliminate that reprocessing time each time you change something. So that's cool. Okay, so that's kind of how you would build all your curb, gutter, sidewalk, all your ramps with your standardized slopes and stuff for the ADA requirements, all with the vertical design, and you do that pretty much every day on all the jobs you do, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so if you then look at being a new user, if you're just starting out with, let's say, not necessarily starting out with TBC, but we introduced the vertical design. I see a lot of people don't even know it exists. If you're a new user and you could give them some advice in terms of the way to start this, learning how to use it, what kind of tips would you give them as a way to start with this and how to build up their knowledge and skill set?
The biggest one I would say is keep it simple. The simpler you keep your vertical designs and those relationships, the easier it is to manage and the easier it is to kind of learn the tool. I do some crazy stuff with it. Here's a project where I've done pretty much all of it with the vertical design as far as the pavement, the gutter lines, the edge of pavement. If we look at my vertical designs in here, I have how many? 20. All with different segments and then all within them kind of varying instructions. And you can do very complex stuff with it, but staying organized, staying methodical, staying sequential is very critical for it. So you really want to start simple and kind of build upon it. That's why I kind of stick with the numerical system. I try to kind of say, okay, in this instance, my gutter line right here, this is my controlling line. So I know that this roadway is going to be dependent on that gutter line. So I'm going to make my first kind of vertical design based off of that and then build upon that. So it does take a lot of organization, but once you do that and you do the setup, it makes it a lot easier to go into the to go back and make adjustments and clean stuff up, apply vertical curves, and know that everything is going to tie together very nicely. You can see I have a few flags, and some of it's just small discrepancies. If we zoom in, you're talking very minuscule that I wouldn't even honestly fuss around with. But when we look at from an overall, there's really not a lot. And in something like this is a very complex project because you've got a lot of different pavement sections coming in together, that it can be a nightmare to make sure that things are tying together. So by using that vertical design, you can kind of run a scenario and see how it's going to update, and then run another scenario and make sure that everything's going to kind of dynamically tie together.
Right. In that drawing there's obviously a lot of lines that you wouldn't get given by the engineer, where you've actually mapped out the pavement areas with the slopes that you're going to use and that kind of thing. That's kind of where I was referring to earlier on about the strategy of how to build this. So when you're building out a job like this, do you spend the time building that extra line work in like the 2D drawing before you even start trying to elevate things, or do you just do that as you need it? How do you kind of go about doing that?
At first, I didn't kind of add that to my 2D line work, but now I do, because I try to add, so these purple or magenta lines are my break lines. And these are, I treat these lines like how we would grade it or how we're going to pave it. So I add those in there and I supply those to the field. I may not supply those to the machine control, but I supply those to the data collectors, because ultimately that's what's giving me the model its structure, its rigidity. So to me, those are crucial to have, because that's going to kind of reinforce to the field, okay, these are the lines we need to snap on to really shape this model and to make it happen. So those are some of the first things that I do, and they're, in some cases, they're very easy. You're just offsetting based off of your kind of control line, whether it's your gutter line or your ridge line. And then some of them you're going to add as you kind of build the model. A unique area over in here This was one that I added after the fact because there wasn't a clear-cut travel way necessarily that we would use. So it can be a hybrid. I try to kind of plant or map out as much as possible when I first get the data, but just like everything else, different projects, different scenarios, it's kind of it varies as you get into the model and you run different scenarios.
Right. And it's pretty obvious when you really think about it, but it takes a little while to kind of get to the point as a user, oh, damn, that's how I have to do it, right? That's how the engineer planned it. That's how I'm going to have to do it. And the areas, like when you get to the corner areas around those curved corner islands, those bits, the quadrant corners or whatever, those are kind of warped in from the elevations that you're given on the curb or the flow line, and also the elevations computed by the vertical design along those magenta lines, right? So you basically warp those together to make them fit, right? But they're designed from a few elevations and a few slopes to get to where you want to be, right? So, but again, I think this is where, what I see when I'm trying to teach people to start off with how to do this kind of work is that planning and strategy of getting your line work right first before you even start trying to mess with the verticals is kind of really important. Making sure it's all joined where you need it to be joined, make sure it's all broken where you need it to be broken, and have a clear plan on how you're going to build the model. And if you do that, I'm going to use the side slope tool for this. I'm going to use the vertical design tool for that. I'm going to use a corridor for maybe doing that piece of it. And I'm going to then build all that together into this composite model at the end, using all the 3D line work from that to build up a composite surface. I also see that you texture and render your models at the end of it. Like, why do you do that? Is that just so you can present it to management, or do you have some other use for that downstream?
Just before I get to that, I want to call out what I did for these curb returns because I thought this was kind of unique. Okay. So again, using the vertical design as a container, obviously there's different ways you can do this throughout TBC selection sets, something I haven't quite fully dived into yet, but they're another way to do this. But so what I ended up doing is I added all my curb returns as a vertical design, and I locked those elevations. And the reason I do that is I can click on that vertical design, right click and hit select child lines. And then what I can do is as I'm updating the model, I can actually use the elevate lines, throw those in there, and then select my 3D lines that those are going to be generated off of. So like you mentioned, Alan, I can use those, even though those are just kind of draped, to elevate those curb returns, which works pretty slick. And then by doing that, this is probably going to break everything. So now no, not bad. And then I have one more instruction after that, which is for the actual curb itself. So I rebuild that. And once you're said and done, now your curb returns are nice and elevated, and your back of curb is elevated. So that works very well, especially when you have islands in the middle. And again, going back to, you probably take these islands out for the machine control. You can just grab all of the child lines of those designs and take them out, and now you got a surface that blows through those. But in regard to the texture, the reason I add the texture is for a few reasons. One, for project management, kind of being able to visualize this, walk it through with an engineer. If we're trying to kind of discuss an area of interest, makes it a little easier to visualize versus a model that might just have the elevation color turned on. This tends to be a little bit easier on the eyes. Also for Sightvision. And then also because now these aren't just textures, but I can actually apply my subgrades in there. So if I wanted to run a cut and fill analysis, I have subgrades associated to this. So now you really get an all-encompassing model that it's got estimating data built into it. It's got project management data built out to it. You can send all this data out into the field. So you're starting to get away from kind of the silos of estimating has a model, project management might have a model, survey might have a model, machine control might have a model. You're bringing it all together into one truly kind of BIM, all-encompassing, one working model that you should be able to use from start to finish on a project. And by doing so, I think you find issues, you address issues, you get a better product because you're seeing it all the way through.
That's awesome. Yeah, I need to say that you mentioned Sightvision there. Could you just talk a little bit about that? I know that's a relatively new product from Trimble. Maybe some people aren't even aware of what it does. But could you just talk about what you do with this in Sightvision and how that works?
Yeah, so Sightvision is a very cool product. It's an Android. It runs on an Android phone, and there's a very small. They call it the Trimble Catalyst. So it's a GPS dish that's about, I'd say, probably 3 inches in rate or 6 inches in diameter, and you attach your phone to this bracket, and you can actually walk around on site. I'd probably have a ton of pictures on here, but let me just pull one up from Google real quick. And the value of this is you can walk outside and you can engage with clients, you can engage with engineers, and you can show them what your model is going to look like. I like to use it with our operators. If we're going to make a fancy pond, you can take this out and you can walk around using augmented reality and take a model that would normally be intangible and kind of give it a sense of tangibility. And kind of walk it and see what's going to go on. And
So
I've got
the operators can relate to that better. They get a feel for what they're trying to build before they build it.
Yep, so much so that they have an augmented reality camera on Earthworks now. So I think there's a lot of value there, and it's just going to keep coming. And it makes it a lot easier too, especially when you're training. I'm relatively young, so everything in a sense is kind of new to me. And it's taking a model like this and learning and kind of visually seeing it and being able to see, okay, this is why this doesn't work. Your slope might crash into your railroad. That's more obvious than sometimes a 2D line on a map that you're trying to digest everything else. That just gets a little cumbersome.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks for that, Pat. I mean, you got a couple of minutes left, and I know that you're a huge proponent for asking for stuff. If you could change anything in here and you could add anything to this tool, or you could have your 3 wishes, provided by Trimble, what would they be?
So I think the first one with the vertical design that would be extremely useful is, like you mentioned, your construction lines that you use, you have to set those up and be strategic about it. So if I grab on this magenta line right here, this is a gutter line. And if I turn on, another thing I like to do too, and I'm glad Trimble has this, I wanted to expand more, is 3D utilities. That's a great thing. But if I turn that on, that's my gutter line. So that's ultimately what's going to control my surface. But the issue with this is my edge of pavement actually runs parallel or in line with that. And with the vertical design, you currently cannot connect those two. I can't take my edge of pavement and say, okay, from this, and I'll show this on the plan view. So from here to here, take my edge of pavement and basically just copy the vertical of that gutter line. I have to manually do that right now, which isn't bad. I mean, don't get me wrong, the vertical design saves me a ton of time. That it's worth it, but it would be nice if I could link those two. So as you're going through, and again, you're kind of fussing with that gutter line, you're adding those vertical curves, really smoothing it out. You know that your edge of pavement is going to update as well based off of that gutter line. And this happens more in parking lots because your control line that you use for vertical design tends to be either a high point or a low point that runs along your curb or your edge of pavement, because that's where the water's flowing. So that would be one. I think the next one would be able to I create a lot of groups. So have the ability to either create a group and run these all at once and have them sequentially run. That way I don't have to manually go in here and say, okay, rebuild, and then rebuild and rebuild. Again, it's a lot faster than kind of having everything independent, but it does take up some time. And I knew there was another one.
Well, you don't get any more, Pat. I guess that's
Okay.
it.
I'm cut off.
You've always got email in the community to give us that one, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I think this is really good session. I think we'll open up to questions at this point. Nick, if you've got any people have asked any questions during the session, if you've got a question as a user and you're online, please just put them into the chat area and Nick will pick up on them and ask them. And if not, then we'll hand back to DeLondon at this point and he can do the wrap up here. But again, thanks very much for sharing your knowledge and know-how on this stuff, Pat. You do fantastic work, I have to say. And good luck with the wedding and take care of the dog. And I'm sure we'll be in touch going forward, right? And keep up the great work, And if anybody's got any questions after the fact, you can reach Pat through the community forum for Trimble. So if you just go there and ask questions to him, I'm sure he can answer those. Or if you've got questions that you'd like me to kind of dive in on, again, please ask them on the community forum and I'd be happy to either talk to Pat about getting you an answer or providing you an answer directly, depending on what kind of questions you ask. Again, thanks very much for taking the hour out of your day, Pat, to share what you're doing here. It's fantastic work. So Nick, has there any questions or?
Yeah, oh yeah, we got some questions here. First off, can you guys see my screen, the TBC resources? Is that popping up fine? Okay,
Yep.
Great. So yeah, we have a few. So going back to the beginning, Pat, when you go to standardize your layers, how do you handle the naming of the lines? Do you name those lines? Do you use a macro for that, or do you have the properties window up and change them as you go?
I have a naming convention for that. So everything P is proposed. If it's a utility, I put UT for it. If it's existing, it's got X on it. But all of that is taking whatever the engineer had as a name and kind of manually going through that and assigning it to layers I've already kind of pre-described. And I just find that's easier because to try and just kind of automate that, you're going to have some stuff that gets mixed up. So it takes a minute or two longer, but it's just it's a way of QA/QCing it.
Okay. When creating a curve following a line, does the vertical curve create a smooth curve or does it segment it?
It creates a smooth curve, which is very nice.
It's based off of the line that you have. So if there's a vertical curve in the line, it'll create that. If it's segmented, it'll create that. I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
Is the vertical design tool practical for building a surface for takeoff purposes, or is the intent of this tool more for GPS modeling for machine control?
I would say you can use it for everything. It all depends on your speed and your comfort on it, but I've used it for takeoff models, especially for subdivisions. I think it works very fast and quick. Depending on the setup of it, depending on how complex a model, it might be a little too much setup for a takeoff, depending on how fast you're trying to spit it out. But then again, if you're trying to analyze it for value engineering, it's a very nice tool because now everything's dynamically linked that you can run different scenarios very quickly. So the maybe extra half an hour it might take you to set it up could save you a lot of time in running different scenarios and ultimately win you the bid.
Awesome. I think this next question is probably going to be best handled on the forums, but Jordan would like to have an example of an efficient way to create stakeout points for roads subgrades based off of the vertical design tool, or vertical design model, I should say. How would one use vertical design when building a super elevation? That might also be best done on the forum as well too. Unless you guys have a quick explanation of it.
Yeah, that might be one better with an example.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Okay, well, thank you guys very much. Huh?
Sorry, Nick, I can just tackle that super elevation question. So when you're building road models, depending on what kind of highway you're building, if you're building like urban roads or you're building major highways, it's a different answer. The you can put in different cross slopes at different locations. So where you would build a slope table in a corridor model to say at station X, you had a cross slope of this, and at station Y, you have a different cross slope or the same cross slope, whatever. You can do exactly the same thing in the vertical design. So you can put a different cross slopes at different locations, and it will warp the surface between those locations. So you can mimic super elevation information that you would normally put in through tables in a vertical design. But there are limitations of the vertical design for highways work because it calculates everything perpendicular to the previous string, not necessarily to the center line. So where you may normally have, let's say, 2 or 3 lanes that maybe deviate from the center line, then your cross slopes would normally be calculated in the corridor perpendicular to the alignment, not necessarily perpendicular to the previous lane edge. Whereas in vertical design, it's calculating to the previous lane edge, which is actually giving you a better cross slope model than the traditional road design method, but it may not match the traditional road design method. So you just have to be aware of that. But for doing a lot of kind of roads where there's slope changes, you can certainly handle that with the vertical design tool.
Awesome.
All right, Nick.
Yep, thank you very much. Appreciate that. So just to wrap things up real quick here, some of the resources that we have for Trimble Business Center. The web page is heavyindustry.trimble.com. Can lead you to the construction side of the Business Center download, or geospatial would be www.trimble.com/TBC. On these pages, you're going to be able to find the latest webinars, customer success stories, testimonials, information such as that when it comes to the software itself. Within the software or just going directly through YouTube, we have posted videos on how to use Business Center, various workflows that have been provided for you guys free of charge to go take a look at. We have our power hours that we are conducting at least twice a month, dependent. Survey has been doing a lot of them. We actually plan on condensing and organizing these power hour links for essentially after the showing viewings. Into one page, so you'll be able to see both the geospatial ones and the construction ones for easy access, so you guys can surf through them to see what is important to you and then learn accordingly. We have our TBC community pages. This is the forum that we were mentioning just a little bit ago. If you guys have any type of concerns, you want to reach out to the community who are power users who are using this, or just explore different workflows that have already been posted, please do jump online, sign up, and ask questions and come learn with us. We have our TBC macros community page to get macros. And then if you guys have seen a couple of the presentations that Alan has been doing with Rockpile Solutions, going to Rockpile Solutions website, downloading the TML status program and installing that makes it really easy to get these macros installed onto your computer. It's very important to do this. Pat was showing a couple of them in his presentation. It's something that you'll use on a daily basis more and more to get things done quicker and more efficiently. For those who are your do-it-yourselfers, we have a Trimble library of videos that has attached data as well to it that you can go through and train yourself on the uses of Trimble Business Center, and also other actual products such as SiteWorks and EarthWorks have been posted on there as well too. Next steps to get a hold of this for your new users, you can download the latest version of Business Center online. When you fill out the form, you will get a free 30-day code sent directly to your email. If you are looking for some support, you can find them at the partner locations down below, depending if you're a construction worker for construction needs, or if you are a surveyor and you need surveying needs. The next power hour is going to be going over how Vision Link, and which will be termed WorksOS coming pretty quick here, works with Business Center and specific to landfill data. So I hope to see you all there. Thank you guys very much for attending.
Thanks a lot, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.